The daimyo gave him one night to disappear. Not a trial, not forgiveness, just a final mercy before exile erased his name from the clan forever. Any other samurai would have used those hours to flee, to put distance between himself and a life already lost. Murakami Jiro chose something else. As the full moon climbed above the castle walls, he walked not toward the road, but toward the heir of the domain. He did not teach him swordsmanship. He did not teach him strategy. He taught him the one lesson that could outlive exile, a way of thinking so dangerous that, by morning, nothing in that domain would ever be the same again. 3 days before his exile, Jiro had been a respected man, not powerful, not wealthy, not the kind of samurai whose name was spoken in councils or whose opinion shaped policy, but respected in the quiet way that mattered. The younger warriors sought his guidance. The servants treated him with genuine warmth rather than obligatory deference. Even Lord Katsuro, who rarely acknowledged those beneath his station, would sometimes pause when passing Jiro in the corridors and offer a small nod of recognition. 20 years of service had earned him that much. 20 years of obedience, of duty performed without complaint, of being exactly what a samurai was supposed to be. Then came the merchant. His name was Ogawa Saburo, a trader from the coastal provinces who had built a modest fortune importing silk and ceramics. He had committed no crime that Jiro could see. His taxes were paid. His dealings were honest. His only mistake was being successful enough to attract the envy of a rival who happened to have connections at court. The accusation was treason. The evidence was letters, supposedly written by Ogawa, revealing trade secrets to a competing domain. The letters were forgeries. Jiro knew this because he had seen the merchant's actual handwriting on legitimate documents, and the two bore no resemblance. But forgeries backed by powerful men become the truth, and truth backed by no one becomes irrelevant. Lord Katsuro ordered the execution to be carried out publicly, as a warning to others who might consider betraying the domain's commercial interests. Jiro was selected for the task. An honor, they called it, a recognition of his years of faithful service. He stood in the courtyard with his sword drawn, the merchant kneeling before him, and he looked at the man's face. Ogawa was not begging, was not protesting his innocence, though he had done so extensively during his brief trial. He had simply accepted what was coming, the way men do when they understand that justice and law are not always the same thing. Jiro raised his blade, and could not bring it down. The moment stretched. The assembled samurai shifted uncomfortably. Lord Katsuro's expression darkened from ceremonial solemnity to genuine displeasure. "Proceed," the lord commanded. Jiro lowered his sword. "I cannot, my lord. This man is innocent." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one breathed. 20 years of perfect service, shattered by a single sentence. "You refuse a direct order?" "I refuse to execute an innocent man." "With respect, my lord, the evidence against him is false. The letters are forgeries. Someone with influence wants him dead for reasons that have nothing to do with treason." Lord Katsuro's face became stone. "Take him away. Find another to complete the task." The execution proceeded. Another samurai stepped forward, one who had no doubts or simply knew better than to voice them. Ogawa died with dignity, his head rolling across the courtyard stones while Jiro watched from where guards held his arms. That evening, the sentence was pronounced exile, effective at dawn. A mercy, everyone whispered, considering the severity of his defiance. Lord Katsuro could have demanded his head. Instead, he offered one night and an open road. Some called it weakness. Others recognized it for what it was, a debt being paid, though no one alive remembered what the debt was for. Jiro did not pack. He had few possessions worth carrying. A spare kimono, a small pouch of coins, his swords, which were his own and not the clan's. Everything else belonged to the life he was leaving behind, and that life no longer wanted him. Instead of preparing for the road, he walked. The castle at night was a different world than the castle by day. The busy corridors fell silent. The servants retreated to their quarters. The samurai who had nodded to him that morning now looked away when he passed, as if his disgrace might be contagious. Jiro did not blame them. He understood how the system worked, how it had to work. You could not maintain order if men were free to refuse orders based on personal judgment. The entire structure of loyalty and obedience would collapse, and yet he had looked at Agao's face and seen a man who did not deserve to die. And something in him, something deeper than training, deeper than duty, had simply refused. He walked through the outer gardens, past the training grounds where he had spent countless hours, past the small shrine where he had prayed each morning. The full moon hung enormous in the cloudless sky, turning the world to silver and shadow. At the edge of the private garden, reserved for the Lord's family, he stopped. Someone was already there. Hayashi Takeshi sat on a stone bench beside the ornamental pond, staring at the moon's reflection in the still water. He was 17, tall for his age, with the lean build of a young man who trained diligently, but had not yet filled out into full adulthood. His face, caught in the moonlight, showed the weight of thoughts too heavy for his years. Jiro knew he should leave. The private garden was forbidden to all but the Lord's immediate family. His presence here, especially tonight, could be interpreted as threat or madness. Either would give Lord Katsuro reason to withdraw even the small mercy of exile. But something in the boy's posture held him, a loneliness that felt familiar. "You should not be here," Takeshi said without turning. "Neither should I, but I have the excuse of birth." "What is yours?" Jiro considered lying, considered claiming he had lost his way in the dark, or had come to pay respects at the small shrine visible at the garden's far end. Instead, he told the truth. "I have nowhere else to be, young lord, and it seemed a waste to spend my last night in this castle staring at walls." Takeshi turned then, his eyes finding Jiro in the shadows. "Murakami Jiro, the samurai who refused. Yes, my father says you are a fool, that you threw away everything for a merchant who was already dead the moment the accusation was made. Your father is not wrong. Then why did you do it?" The question hung in the air between them. Such a simple question, such an impossible answer. Jiro walked closer, stopping at a respectful distance from the bench. The moonlight fell across both of them now, erasing the differences of rank and age, leaving only to figures in silver and shadow. "May the first sit, young lord?" Takeshi gestured to the far end of the bench. Jiro settled there, his swords positioned carefully, his posture formal even in this informal setting. "I have asked myself that question many times in the past 3 days," Jiro said. "Why did I refuse? What was Ogawa to me? A stranger, a merchant I had seen perhaps twice in my life. His death would not have cost me anything. His life, it seems, has cost me everything. Then you regret it?" Jiro considered the question seriously. Takeshi deserved honesty, not the comfortable platitudes adults usually offered the young. "No, that is a strange thing. I have lost my place, my purpose, my name. Tomorrow I will be nothing. And yet, when I imagine myself bringing that sword down on an innocent man's neck, I feel something worse than regret. I feel like I would have lost myself, the thing that makes me who I am." Takeshi was silent for a long moment, his eyes returning to the moon's reflection. "My tutors teach me about Bushido, the 7 virtues. They say loyalty is the highest, that a samurai's duty to his lord supersedes all other considerations. But you placed something above loyalty. What was it?" "Righteousness, the very first virtue, though often the most forgotten." "I do not understand. Is loyalty not righteousness? Serving your lord faithfully?" Jiro smiled faintly. This was the question, wasn't it? The crack in the foundation that the entire system was built to conceal. "Let me ask you something, young lord. If your father ordered you to kill a child, would you obey?" Takeshi's expression flickered with shock. "My father would never order such a thing. But if he did, I would refuse." "Obviously. Then you have already placed something above loyalty. You have already decided that some orders are wrong, regardless of who gives them. The only question is where you draw the line. If you have felt the weight of this conversation, subscribe. It helps us bring more stories of wisdom and courage from old Japan. And tell us, what city are you watching from?" Takeshi stared at Jiro as if seeing him for the first time. "That is not what my tutors teach, no. It would not be. Your tutors are paid by your father to prepare you to inherit his domain. They teach you what serves the system, not necessarily what is true. You speak of treason. I speak philosophy. Confucius taught that the relationship between lord and vassal flows in two directions. The lord owes the vassal just rule. The vassal owes the lord faithful service. But if the lord abandons justice, the vassal's obligation changes. He cannot follow his master into darkness without becoming dark himself. Takeshi shook his head slowly. If every samurai decided for himself which orders to follow, there would be chaos. The domain would collapse. You are right, and that is why most men obey, even when the orders are wrong, because the alternative seems worse. But consider this, young lord. What happens when obedience becomes absolute? When men follow orders without thought, without question, without the courage to say this is wrong? Order is maintained. Order, yes, but justice, humanity, the very things that order is supposed to protect. Jiro paused, letting the words settle. I have served your father for 20 years. I have obeyed countless orders, some wise, some questionable, some I disagreed with entirely. I obeyed because I trusted that the system, imperfect as it was, served a greater good. But 3 days ago, I was asked to kill a man I knew to be innocent, and I discovered there was a line I could not cross. Not because I am brave, not because I am righteous, simply because I could not live with myself if I did. Takeshi was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller, younger. I watched the execution. From my window, I saw you refuse, and I saw the other samurai step forward. He did not hesitate, no. Was he wrong to obey? The question was genuine, searching. Not a challenge but a plea for understanding. I cannot judge him, Jiro said carefully. Perhaps he believed the evidence. Perhaps he has a family to feed and could not afford the luxury of conscience. Perhaps he simply trusts Lord Katsuro more than I do. Each man must find his own line and decide what happens when he reaches it. But you think he was wrong. I think the execution was wrong. Whether the man who carried it out shares the guilt, I do not know. That is between him and whatever gods he prays to. Takeshi pulled his knees to his chest, a gesture that made him look younger than his 17 years. The moonlight caught the moisture in his eyes, quickly blinking away. I do not know what I would have done if I had been the one ordered to carry out the execution. You are young. You have not yet been tested. When the moment comes, and it will come, you will discover what you are made of. Until then, all you can do is think, question, prepare your mind for decisions your body has not yet faced. My father would say that thinking too much makes a samurai weak, that hesitation kills. In battle, perhaps, but you will not spend your life in battle, young lord. You will spend it in councils and courts, making decisions that affect thousands of lives. The hesitation that kills a warrior on the battlefield might save a merchant from wrongful execution, or a village from unnecessary taxation, or a domain from a war that serves only pride. A cloud passed over the moon, dimming the garden to a deeper shadow. When it passed, Takeshi's face had changed. The curiosity remained, but beneath it was something raw. Fear, perhaps, or the first stirrings of a burden he was only beginning to understand. I never asked to inherit, he said quietly. My father has never asked what I want. No one has. Since I was old enough to understand words, I have been told what I will become. Lord of this domain, master of these people, keeper of traditions I did not create and am not permitted to question. Jiro heard the ache beneath the words, the loneliness of a young man surrounded by people who saw only his title, never his soul. What would you want, if you could choose? Takeshi laughed, a bitter sound too old for his face. I do not even know. How can you want something you have never been allowed to imagine? I know only duty. I know only the shape of the cage I was born in. And yet you are here tonight, in a forbidden garden, speaking with a disgraced samurai about dangerous ideas. That suggests something in you wants more than the cage, or suggests I am foolish, like you. Perhaps foolishness and wisdom are not as different as we are taught. The wisest men I have known were all called fools at some point. The most foolish were those who never questioned anything. Takeshi unfolded himself from the bench and stood, walking to the edge of the pond. His reflection joined the moon's in the still water, to pale shapes floating in darkness. In 2 years, perhaps 3, my father will step down and I will take his place. I will sit where he sits, give orders as he gives orders, judge men as he judges men, and everyone will expect me to be exactly what he is, to make the same choices he makes, to see the world through his eyes. Is that what you want? It does not matter what I want. It is what will happen. Those are not the same thing. Jiro rose and walked to stand beside him, both of them looking down at their moonlit reflections. Your father rules as he believes he must. You will rule as you believe you must. The question is what you will believe when the time comes, whether you will accept the shape you have been given or find a shape of your own. Can a lord do that? Find his own shape, or must he simply become what the domain requires? Every lord in history has faced that question. Some became what was expected. Some broke under the weight of expectations. A few, a very few, found a way to honor both duty and conscience, to serve the system while gently, carefully, bending it toward something better. How? Jiro turned to look at the young man. In the moonlight, Takeshi's face held the same hunger Jiro had seen in his own reflection decades ago. The hunger for something true in a world built on convenient fictions. By thinking, by questioning, even when questions are discouraged, by surrounding yourself with people who will tell you the truth rather than what you want to hear, by remembering that the peasants in the fields and the merchants in the streets are not pieces on a game board, but human beings with lives as valuable as your own. That sounds like weakness. My father would say compassion invites exploitation. Your father has survived 52 years as Lord of this domain. His methods work within their limits. But ask yourself, when he dies, what will people say of him? That he was strong? That he was feared? Or that he was just? That he was loved? Takeshi had no answer. The question itself seemed to trouble him, like a stone dropped into the still water of assumptions he had never examined. They talked through the first hours of darkness, moving from the pond to a covered pavilion when the night air grew cold. Jiro spoke of his own youth, when he had believed everything his masters taught him, spoke of the battles he had fought and the men he had killed, some in honorable combat, others in situations he preferred not to remember, spoke of the slow erosion of certainty that came with age, as the simple truths of youth revealed themselves to be far more complicated than anyone had admitted. Takeshi listened with an intensity that surprised them both. He asked questions no one had ever encouraged him to ask, about the nature of loyalty and its limits, about the difference between honor as reputation and honor as integrity, about what it meant to be a good lord, not merely a successful one. Confucius taught that the ruler must be virtuous before demanding virtue from his subjects. Jiro said as the moon climbed toward its zenith, that power without morality is tyranny, regardless of how it is dressed. Your tutors have taught you strategy and protocol, but have they taught you this? They have not. Then let me ask you something they would never ask. When you become lord, what kind of lord do you wish to be? Takeshi was quiet for a long time. When he answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. I want to be a lord that men follow because they believe in me, not because they fear punishment. I want to give orders that I would be willing to obey if our positions were reversed. I want to judge men as I would want to be judged, with evidence and fairness, not politics and convenience. He paused, then added with a bitter laugh, I want what is probably impossible. Impossible, perhaps, but worth wanting. A man who aims at the impossible may fall short and achieve only the difficult. A man who aims at nothing achieves exactly that. My father achieved a great deal by aiming at the practical. Your father inherited a domain at war and made it peaceful. He inherited debt and created prosperity. These are real achievements. But his methods created resentments that you will inherit along with his title. The merchants who fear to speak honestly. The samurai who obey without thinking. The peasants who work harder each year for rewards that grow smaller. These two are his legacy. The question is whether you will perpetuate them or address them. Takeshi turned to face Jiro. Directly. The moonlight caught his features, and for a moment he looked not like a boy burdened by inheritance, but like a young lord finding his footing. Why are you telling me these things? You're leaving at dawn. You will never see this domain again, never know what kind of lord I become. What does it matter to you? Jiro considered the question. It deserved honesty, Because I spent 20 years in service and accomplished nothing that will outlast me. The orders I followed, the duties I performed, the obedience I gave without thought, none of it changed anything. Tomorrow I will walk through those gates and become nothing, just another Ronin on a road going nowhere." He paused, feeling the weight of his own words. "But tonight, I can plant a seed. I cannot know if it will grow, cannot know if anything I say will matter when the pressures of rule close around you. But if there is even a small chance that these words take root, that you become something more than what the system wants you to be, then perhaps my life will have meant something after all." Takeshi held his gaze for a long moment. "That is a heavy burden to place on a conversation in a garden. It is. But burdens are how we grow. And you, young lord, are strong enough to carry more than anyone has allowed you to lift." The moon had passed its zenith when Takeshi asked the question that had been forming since their conversation began. "You said my father owes you something. That is why you received exile instead of execution. What happened between you?" Jiro had known this question would come, had prepared himself for it, or thought he had. But now, facing the son of the man whose life he had saved, the words felt heavier than expected. "It was 25 years ago, before you were born, before your father was lord. The War of the Three Bridges. My tutors speak of it often. The battle that secured our domain's northern border. They speak of victory. They do not speak of how close it came to being a defeat." Jiro leaned back against the pavilion's wooden pillar, letting the memories surface. He had buried them for so long that they felt almost like another man's experiences. But they were his. Every detail, still sharp after a quarter century. "I was not a samurai then. I was Ashigaru, a foot soldier, barely 20 years old, carrying a spear I had only learned to use the year before. Your father was 27, leading his first major campaign. He was brave, perhaps too brave. He led charges personally when he should have commanded from safety. The men loved him for it. But love does not stop arrows." Takeshi leaned forward, his earlier weariness forgotten. "What happened?" "The battle turned against us on the second day. Our eastern flank collapsed. The enemy cavalry broke through and began hunting our officers. Your father was separated from his guard during a retreat through the forest. I found him surrounded by 4 enemy soldiers in a clearing by the river." Jiro paused, remembering the scene. The desperation in young Katsuro's eyes. The blood was already staining his armor from a wound in his side. The absolute certainty in the enemy soldiers' faces that they had captured a prize worth more than gold. "I was supposed to be retreating with my unit, supposed to be following orders, preserving myself for the next engagement. Instead, I charged for mounted warriors with nothing but a spear, and whatever madness had taken hold of me. You saved him. I bought time, killed one, wounded another, distracted the rest long enough for your father to cut his way free. We ran together through the forest while they pursued, found our lines just as reinforcements arrived. That is heroic. Why is it not celebrated? Why does no one speak of this?" Jiro smiled, a thin expression without joy. "Because your father was ashamed. A future lord, saved by an Ashigaru. A nobleman rescued by a peasant with a spear. It did not fit the story his family wanted to tell. So the story was changed. He fought his way free alone, they said. He showed courage and skill against overwhelming odds. The Ashigaru who happened to be nearby was mentioned in no accounts. But he rewarded you, promoted you, quietly, incrementally, over years, so no one would connect my rise to that day. I became a samurai not through public recognition, but through accumulated small favors. A better posting here, a recommendation there. Your father paid his debt in a currency no one could trace." Takeshi's face had grown troubled. He lied. About his own history. He allowed a lie to be told. It is a fine distinction, but one that mattered to him. Is there a difference? You will have to decide that for yourself. When you are Lord, you will discover that truth is often inconvenient, that the stories people need to believe are not always the stories that happened. You will be tempted to shape narratives as your father shaped his. The question is whether you will resist that temptation, and at what cost. They sat in silence while a night bird called somewhere in the darkness beyond the garden walls. He gave you one night, Takeshi said finally. Because of what you did 25 years ago. Yes, but if the debt was so great, Why not pardon you entirely? Why exile at all? Jiro had asked himself the same question. The answer was uncomfortable, but the boy deserved to hear it. Because your father is a practical man. His gratitude is real, but so is his position. If he pardons a samurai who publicly refused orders, he invites every other samurai to follow their conscience. The system he has built depends on obedience. One exception, publicly tolerated, becomes a precedent. A precedent becomes an expectation. An expectation becomes the collapse of order. So his hands were tied. His hands were tied by the system he chose to maintain. There is always a choice, young lord. Your father could have pardoned me and dealt with the consequences. He could have admitted the merchant was innocent and prosecuted those who fabricated evidence. He could have done many things. He chose not to because the cost seemed too high. You judge him. I observe him. Judgment is not my place. I owe him my life as surely as he owes me his. We are bound together by a debt neither of us can fully repay. Takeshi stood abruptly, pacing the small pavilion with restless energy. This is what I will inherit. Debts I did not create. Decisions I was not part of. Consequences of choices made before I was born. How can I be held responsible for a system I had no hand in building? You cannot be held responsible for what came before, but you are responsible for what comes after. Every lord inherits a domain shaped by his predecessors. What he does with that inheritance is his alone. What if I want to change things? What if I want to rule differently than my father? Then you will face resistance. From advisors who benefit from the current system. From samurai who fear change. From allies who expect continuity. Change is possible, but it is never free. You must decide which battles are worth fighting and which will cost more than they gain. Takeshi stopped pacing and turned to face Jiro. How do I know which is which? You learn, you fail, you try again. There is no formula for wisdom, young lord. There is only the slow accumulation of experience, tempered by the willingness to admit when you are wrong. Footsteps on gravel. Both of them froze. Through the garden's entrance came a guard, lantern held high, its light cutting through the moonlit shadows. Behind him walked another figure, taller, moving with the deliberate authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Lord Hayashi Katsuro stepped into the garden. He wore a sleeping robe, hastily tied, but his posture held nothing of sleep. His eyes found his son first, then moved to Jiro with an expression that shifted from surprise to understanding to something harder. Leave us, he said to the guard. The man bowed and retreated, taking his lantern with him. Darkness reclaimed the garden, softened only by the moon. Father, be silent. Katsuro's voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute command. Takeshi's words died in his throat. The lord walked slowly toward the pavilion, each step measured, his gaze never leaving Jiro. I should have known. When they told me my son's chamber was empty, I should have guessed where he would be. Or rather, where you would lead him. Jiro rose and bowed formally. Lord Katsuro, your son found me, not the other way around. Does it matter? You are here, filling his head with whatever poison you have been nursing these past 3 days, teaching him to question, to doubt, to see his father as a tyrant rather than a protector. I have taught him nothing of the kind, no. Katsuro stopped at the pavilion's edge, close enough that Jiro could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. Then what have you taught him, Jiro? What wisdom have you shared in your final hours as a man of this domain? If this story is gripping you, leave a like. It tells the algorithm that tales of honor and wisdom deserve to be heard. And if you want more echoes from old Japan, subscribe and join us. Takeshi stepped forward, placing himself between his father and Jiro. He taught me to think, something your tutors never bothered with. Katsuro's expression flickered with surprise, then anger, then something more complex. He looked at his son as if seeing a stranger. You dare speak to me this way? I dare ask questions. Is that not what a future lord should do? Or should I simply nod and obey until the day you die, then suddenly become wise by inheritance? The silence that followed was suffocating. Jiro watched the confrontation with growing unease. He had not intended this, had not meant to drive a wedge between father and son. Young lord, he said quietly, perhaps you should know. Takeshi did not turn. I will not be silent. Not anymore. Father, I watched you order the execution of an innocent man. I watched your samurai obey without question. And I watched the one man who refused to be punished for his conscience. What am I supposed to learn from that? Katsuro's jaw tightened. You are supposed to learn that order requires sacrifice, that a lord cannot afford the luxury of doubt. And if doubt is not a luxury but a necessity, if thinking before acting is what separates justice from tyranny, who told you that? Him. Katsuro gestured dismissively at Jiro. Does it matter who said it? What matters is whether it is true. For a long moment, father and son stared at each other. The tension between them was almost visible, a current running through the moonlit air. Then, slowly, something shifted in Katsuro's posture. The rigid anger softened, not into acceptance but into weariness. He suddenly looked every one of his 52 years. Jiro, he said without looking away from his son, is this what you wanted? To turn my heir against me with your final breath in my domain? I wanted nothing, Lord Katsuro. I came to this garden seeking only solitude. Your son came seeking answers. I gave him what I could. And what answers did you give? Jiro considered his words carefully. This moment could end in blood or something else entirely. The choice depended on what he said next. I told him that loyalty without thought is empty, that power without conscience is dangerous, that the system he will inherit is imperfect, as all human systems are, and that his duty is not to preserve it blindly, but to improve it wisely. Katsuro turned to face him fully. You told him to question me. I told him to question everything, including himself. That is not rebellion, my lord. It is wisdom. The three of them stood in silence as the moon continued its slow arc across the sky. Dawn was perhaps 2 hours away. Jiro could feel the night ending, his time in this place running out like sand through fingers. 25 years ago, Katsuro said finally, his voice quieter now. By the river. I have never spoken of it. Nor have I, my lord. I told myself it was to protect you. That acknowledging your role would make you a target for my enemies. That keeping the truth hidden served us both. That may have been part of it. Katsuro smiled, a bitter expression. You always saw through me, Jiro. Even when we were young. You knew I was ashamed to owe my life to an Ashigaru. You knew, and you never held it against me. What would holding it against you have accomplished? You promoted me, gave me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. The debt was paid, if unevenly. Was it? Katsuro walked to the edge of the pond, staring at his reflection in the dark water. I gave you rank and income and a place in my domain. And when you finally asked something of me, when you asked for the one thing that truly mattered, I could not give it. I did not ask for anything. I simply refused an order. You asked me to be the kind of lord who values innocence over convenience. And I could not be that lord. Perhaps I never could. Takeshi watched this exchange with wide eyes. He was seeing his father in a way he never had before. Not as an unquestionable authority, but as a man. Flawed, complicated, capable of both generosity and cowardice. Father. Katsuro raised a hand, silencing him. Let me finish. Jiro, I cannot pardon you. You understand why, I do. But I can give you something else. Something that may matter more in the years to come. He turned from the pond to face his son, Takeshi. When I die, and I will die sooner than either of us wants to admit, you will become lord of this domain. You will face choices I cannot prepare you for. You will be pressured by men who care nothing for justice, only advantage. And you will be tempted, as I was tempted, to sacrifice the right for the expedient. He paused, the weight of the words settling over them all. Remember this night. Remember the man who threw away everything because he could not kill an innocent. Remember that such men exist, and that their existence is precious, even when it is inconvenient. Takeshi's voice was rough. I will remember. And when you are lord, if you find yourself about to give an order that would make such a man refuse, stop, think, ask yourself whether the order is truly necessary or merely easy. That is what I should have done 3 days ago. That is what I failed to do. Jiro felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something close to peace. Lord Katsuro, do not thank me. Katsuro's voice hardened again, but not with anger, with the effort of maintaining composure. I am not being generous. I am being selfish. I am trying to undo, through my son, the damage I could not undo myself. The sky had begun to lighten at its eastern edge. Not sunrise yet, but its promise. The deep black softening to purple, the stars beginning to fade. Jiro's time was almost gone. I should prepare to leave, he said. Dawn will be here soon. Katsuro nodded. The gate guards have been instructed to let you pass without question. You will not be followed or harassed. That much I can guarantee. It is more than I expected. Thank you. Do not thank me for scraps when I should have given you a feast. Takeshi stepped forward. Where will you go? Jiro had not thought about it, not really. The road stretched before him, leading everywhere and nowhere. A Ronin's life was one of constant movement, constant uncertainty. Wherever my feet take me, perhaps west to the mountains, perhaps south to the sea. It does not matter. The destination is less important than the walking. Will I ever see you again? The question was genuine, almost childlike in its directness. Jiro felt the weight of it. I do not know, young lord. Perhaps our paths will cross again. Perhaps this night is all we will have. Either way, remember what we spoke of. Not for my sake, but for the sake of the people you will one day rule. Takeshi bowed. Not the formal bow of a lord to a subordinate, but something deeper. A bow of genuine respect. I will remember. I swear it. Jiro returned the bow, equal to equal. Then he turned to Katsuro. Lord Katsuro, it has been an honor to serve you. Despite everything. Katsuro met his eyes. The honor was mine. Despite everything. They did not bow. They did not need to. 25 years of shared history hung between them, acknowledged at last. Even as it came to an end, Jiro walked out of the garden, through the silent corridors, past the sleeping quarters and the empty training grounds. The castle that had been his home for 2 decades felt different now. Smaller, somehow. Less permanent. At the main gate, 2 guards stood at attention. They stepped aside without a word, opening the heavy wooden doors to reveal the road beyond. The first light of dawn touched the mountains in the distance. The sky was gold and pink, and the pale blue of a new day beginning. Jiro stepped through the gate. He did not look back. Lord Hayashi Takeshi sat in his father's chair, in his father's hall, wearing his father's crest. Katsuro had died 3 years ago, quietly, in his sleep. The succession had been smooth. Takeshi had been prepared, as all heirs are prepared, for the mechanics of rule. The councils, the alliances, the endless negotiations that kept a domain functioning. But he had also been prepared in ways no tutor had intended. He thought of Jiro often, in quiet moments between decisions, in the difficult hours before sleep. Whenever he faced a choice that seemed to have no right answer, he would remember the garden, the moonlight, the Ronin who had sacrificed everything for a word he could not speak and a deed he could not do. Today, a merchant stood before him, accused of smuggling. The evidence was solid. The punishment, by law, was death. But something in the case troubled Takeshi. The accuser was a rival merchant, one with connections at court. The evidence, while convincing, had appeared suspiciously quickly, and the accused, kneeling before him now, did not have the look of a man concealing guilt. He had the look of a man who had been trapped. You claim innocence, Takeshi said. I do, my lord. The goods they found in my warehouse were planted there. I do not know by whom, but I swear on my ancestors, I have never traded in contraband. The advisors shifted uncomfortably. The law was clear. The evidence was sufficient. Delay would be seen as a weakness. Takeshi remembered Jiro's words. Ask yourself whether the order is truly necessary or merely easy. The execution will be postponed, he said. I want a full investigation, independent witnesses, an examination of everyone who had access to the accused's warehouse in the days before the search. My lord, one of the senior advisors protested, the evidence is convenient, and convenience makes me suspicious. Takeshi met the advisor's eyes. We will find the truth before we take a life. If that makes us slow, so be it. Justice is worth waiting for. The advisor fell silent. The merchant wept with relief. And somewhere in Takeshi's memory, a Ronin smiled. That evening, a messenger arrived from the western provinces. He carried a small package wrapped in plain cloth, addressed simply to Lord Hayashi. Inside was a letter, brushed in a hand that had grown unsteady with age, and a single object, a small wooden carving of a crane. Takeshi recognized the carving. He had seen it once, hanging from the belt of a man who sat with him in a moonlit garden, teaching him lessons that no tutor would ever approve of. The letter was brief. "Young lord who is no longer young, I heard of your father's passing. I heard, too, of the lord you have become. Word travels, even to remote mountains where old Ronin go to wait for death. They say you listen before you judge. They say you question before you punish. They say your domain is not the harshest in the region, nor the softest, but somehow the most just. I do not know if our conversation in the garden planted these seeds, or if they were in you all along. Perhaps it does not matter. What matters is that they grew. I am old now. My hands shake when I write, and my legs no longer carry me as far as they once did. I will not see another spring, I think, but I will die knowing that one night, in a garden I should not have entered, I spoke with a boy who became a good man. That is enough. That is more than enough. The crane is a gift, not valuable in gold, but I carved it myself during the long winters in the mountains. May it remind you that some things are worth more than their weight in treasure." With respect and gratitude, Murakami Jiro Takeshi read the letter 3 times. Then he placed the wooden crane on the small shelf beside his desk, where he would see it every day. A reminder, a promise, a connection to a night that had changed everything. He picked up his brush and began to write. "To Murakami Jiro, in the western mountains, if this letter reaches you, know that the seeds you planted have indeed grown. I am not the lord my father was. I hope, in small ways, I am better, not because I am wiser or more virtuous, but because one night, a man with nothing left to lose taught me that thinking is not weakness, and conscience is not treason. Come spring, if you are still able to travel, there is a place for you in this castle, not as a servant or samurai, as a guest, as the man who saved my soul before I knew it needed saving. The road is long, and I would not ask you to walk it unless you wish to. But the gate will be open. It will always be open. With respect and gratitude, Hayashi Takeshi." He sealed the letter and called for a messenger. "Find him," he said. "Whatever it takes. Find him before spring." The messenger returned 6 weeks later, as the first cherry blossoms were beginning to open. He came alone. Jiro had died in his sleep 3 days before the messenger arrived. The villagers who had known him spoke of a man who lived simply, helped those in need, and spent his evenings carving small wooden figures that he gave to children. They had buried him on a hillside overlooking the valley. A good spot, they said, peaceful. The kind of place where a man could rest. Takeshi received the news in silence. He dismissed the messenger, then sat alone in his study, looking at the wooden crane. One night, that was all they had shared. A few hours of conversation in a moonlit garden, while the world slept and dawn crept closer. It should not have been enough to change a life, but it had. Takeshi picked up the crane and held it in his palm. Such a small thing, such a small gift from a man who had owned nothing, and yet it was worth more than anything in his treasury. He placed it back on the shelf, where the morning light caught its carved wings. Then he returned to work. There were decisions to make, people to protect, a domain to guide toward something better than what it had been. The lessons of that night were not finished. They would never be finished. They would simply continue, passed from one generation to the next, like seeds carried on the wind. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead go to rest, a Ronin who had spent his last night teaching smiled. His life had meant something after all. If your heart is still open for one more tale, follow the card on your screen. I've chosen another journey that pairs beautifully with this one. Whenever you're ready, I'll be waiting in the next story.